Hi team, I'm Coach Chicken Legs, here to help PTs and coaches improve their programming to make you the 1% of 1% coaches. We are going to hit a big one on the head today, team, in our conversation on this episode of this podcast. I really want to go over for you what I believe the basics of programming are. Now, here's the caveat. Each one of these topics could be a 1 to 2 hour conversation in themselves. And in the coming weeks and months, I will make big in-depth videos around each of these headings, around each of these major topics. But I want to give you a clear plan to what things you should be considering when you're building your individual programs, things that you're thinking to do to tailor the best results you can when you're doing your programming. So let's begin. It may be a long one, team. There's going to be a lot of information. I'm not going to slow down the information. Since it's a digital format, you can pause. So whenever you can, if something doesn't make sense, pause, write down a question, go to the channel and see if I have released the video that's related to your question yet. If not, message us directly and we should be able to help you out. But this will be a big one and it's a lot of concepts. So bear with me. Try to learn as much as you can, and you may need to watch or listen to this episode many times over. But that's okay. That's why we put stuff in a digital format. And for the coaches and PTs out there, that's why I film everything. Because by the time I'm asked something 100 times, if I'd filmed it once, I would have saved myself a lot of effort. So for a good rule of thumb for any beginning PTs, if you're starting to hear a lot of questions come up in your day-to-day training, I suggest you film a response so you can just direct your client to that space. It saves you time, it helps you market, and it helps you build an online following. So not a bad thing to be looking into. Team, I really like the idea of limiting or applying rules to my programming. So like a limiter principle. And what I mean by that is making more and more restrictions to make my programming easier to write. What does that mean? It means that if a client comes to me, as an example, and says, I want to feel better. I want to feel good. And that's their goal, feel good. That's really broad. That is huge. That's such a broad comment. I could give them $1,000 and they might feel better. I might ask them to take a Panadol and they might feel better. Very hard to measure and really challenging to kind of understand what I need to do. It's just too broad and therefore I'm probably going to give them a product they don't necessarily want. But if the client comes up to me and they say, hey, I'm 30 kilos overweight, I might be 40% body fat, I hate running, but I want to lose 30 kilos, become 25 or 20% body fat. I love lifting weights. I hate running. I love stretching, but I don't like doing anything outdoors. I want to only train 3 days a week. I only want to train for an hour a day. These things, the more they give us, the more restricted our program becomes, and therefore the easier it is to tailor someone something. If my client comes to me and says, I want to lose 20 kilos in 2 years and I don't want to do any weights, well, that gives me a time frame and a restriction. So that's fantastic. So it means I have to do cardio-based programming over a 2-year horizon to get them this 20 kilos lost goal. So that's good. They've narrowed it down for me massively. So that's what we're trying to do in our own programming. We're trying to create this idea of narrowing principle or limiting principles to make it so that we have a narrow frame of work. So we have big templates related to programming, and then we just take what the client wants, use our framework, and design something over the two so they just mesh together easily and accurately. So let's look into some of the things that I implement to help with this narrowing or this limiter principle. The first thing I like to do is I break down all movements into 9 categories. So all the movements I think about when I'm programming fit in one of these 9 things. There is push, there is pull, there is plank, there is squat, there is lunge, there is hinge, there is ground to standing, there is gait, and there is crawl. Team, I will release a video at a later date going into far better detail about this, but I just want to give you some context of what I'm thinking about when I'm trying to dissect clients' movements. When I look at these main movements, everything in the gym or in sports are going to fall into one of these categories or a multitude of them. When I'm thinking push, it just means someone's arms moving away from me. So that could be doing a bench press or throwing a ball. Same thing. The idea is to push something away from me. I don't isolate it down to a push-up and a ball throw. They get into the same bracket of a push movement. For my pull, it's anytime I'm bringing something towards me, so my hands are coming closer to my body. Plank is any time that my core is on an angle, so it's supporting more load due to angle. Normally, plank team is a secondary movement, far more common. I usually see planking movements done with push and pull stuff. So if I'm doing a push-up, you also have to hold a plank or the movement doesn't work. So a push-up falls into both these categories. However, it is mainly a push. So you could also categorize it as a push. It's mainly push, but it involves plank. Squat is just when my knees bend, moving me or my legs towards or away from me. It's all built around what's the knee doing. Lunge is the same. Is the knee bending and is the legs split? That was how I define a lunge. Hinge is a little bit different. A hinge is what my hips are doing. Are my hips moving without a bent leg? Is there a hinging movement happening at my hip? A deadlift, a straight leg deadlift, is 100% a hinge. My legs don't bend and my hip goes up and down. Or a good morning when you hold a kettlebell and you lean forward and up and down for your lower back. That's a hinge. A deadlift involves a little bit of a bent knee to do a straight bar deadlift in front of you. That is still a hinge movement because it is mainly done at the hip. The main movement's the hip, okay? However, there is a little bit of squatting movement in there because there's a little bit of bend of the knee, but obviously the main movement is the hinge. If I was to do a hex bar deadlift, it's almost all knee bend. It's really not much hinge at all. And because of that, it falls into a squat category, not a hinge category. So just keep that stuff in mind when you're programming. A ground to standing team is really literal. It means going on from the floor to your feet. It's one of the first skills that any client loses as they age or start running into health issues or injury. So if I'm morbidly obese, usually it's quite challenging to do a ground to standing, which is a reflection of my health. If I have an injury, it might be that true that the ground to standing is challenging and injury to my health. But as you age and your body atrophies, you start getting weaker as you age, this too true will happen. Your ability to do a ground to standing will falter. That's why it's so valuable inside our 9 movement patterns. Gait just means walk, run, or sprint. It's just the action of a foot going through its cycle of stepping. That's all that is. So again, farmer's walk, sled, running, those kind of things. And crawl. Crawl is when you're moving up and across the ground. That's all that is. All of your movements in your training will fall into one of those 9 things. Push, pull, plank, squat, lunge, hinge, ground to standing, gait, and crawl. You've probably heard, and if you're watching the video, noticed that I've put them in brackets of 3. I do that because more often than not, those different movement patterns will be grouped together. So if I'm doing a lower limb training day, I might do squat, lunge, and hinge together. If I'm doing a upper body day, I might do push, pull, and plank together. And if I'm doing functional training, high intensity recovery, or odd position training, I might do ground to standing, gait, and crawl together. Now, that's not a set rule. You don't have to do that. That's not something you absolutely have to do. And in fact, a lot of the bodybuilders in the bodybuilding community, when I'm trying to create growth, they won't do that. They will isolate each of these movements and spread them over their week. That's cool. That's fine. It's not these limiter principles. They are not set rules. They're just to help learn to box. They're helping teach you to keep your guard up until you're skilled enough that you can box with your hands down, for a boxing analogy out there. But basically, you're learning the rules so you can later break them. But traditionally, if my client had a 3-day training week or I had a 3-day class week, 3-day group class, one day would be push, pull, plank, one day would be squat, lunge, hinge, and one day would be ground to standing, gait, and crawl. So over my programs, my personal programs team, throughout my week, I make sure that each of these movements are hit once. If I'm focusing on stuff like functionality, longevity, and all of those stuff, I might do more ground to standing, crawl, planking, and gait stuff than I would push, pull, plank, hinging, and all that stuff. But if I'm doing more hypertrophy, I might focus more on pushing, pulling, and squatting and lunging. Just depends what you're trying to do. And you can grow muscle in all these spaces, and you can also recover and do functional training in all these spaces. But as a general rule of thumb, I'm usually going to see hypertrophy in the push, pull, squat, lunge, and hinge spaces. And I'm going to see functional longevity training in the plank, crawl, gait, and ground to standing. Again, that's not necessarily true. For gait, if you look at a sprinter, they're usually pretty jacked because of the fast twitch muscle fiber explosion nature of their training, and they mainly do running. So these are not set rules, but things to consider. But all I need you to think about is this. In your training program throughout a week, try to, as you're writing stuff, incorporate each one of these because they are one of the key fundamentals to this idea of the limiter principle or the key things when you're looking at program design. Caveat for you, a lot of this stuff isn't going to make sense in this video because we have to dissect not just what stuff we use when we're doing program design, but how to use it. So it's one thing for me to tell you the things I consider while I program. It's another thing for me to tell you how to use it to apply directly for the stuff you're doing. So do keep that in mind, team. I'm not trying to overload you. I'm not saying that this video will make you a 1,000% amazing programmer. It's giving you good concepts around something who an experienced programmer might consider. And then it's our job to help you apply them to what you're already doing. So not a bad idea for you just to start implementing one or two of these main fundamental ideas onto your program and see if it improves what you're doing. Let's talk about the phases of programming. We have off season, and I've stolen this straight from professional athletes and sports trainers team. This is not my own thing, but this is fantastic. They use this at an elite level. They have off seasons, they have pre-seasons, they have on season, and then they have recovery season. Excuse my messy writing and the glare, but off-season team, we use this for a couple of things. We are always programming for bouts of the year or bouts of 12 weeks or 8 weeks. We're always thinking in terms of the year amount of progress and the progress one of our programs will deliver. So most of my programs will alternate between 8 and 12 weeks. But I have an overarching yearly plan as well. And to be able to track that, I put my training programs into one of these 4 headings. What most sporting athletes and sporting coaches will do is they will think of the year as a seasons, because there are some times that we're training to improve our skills, and there's sometimes that we were training so that we can perform better at sports. Off season is when we're not doing any of our sport. We are training brand new skills, and we are trying to incorporate those skills into our current game plan. What does that mean? It means if you're a jiu-jitsu instructor or a jiu-jitsu fighter, I might spend the off season, which could be anywhere between 2 and 4 months, depending on how you've programmed it, learning new ways to fight, new skills that you didn't have, or that skills you didn't have that were exposed in the last game season, the last on season. This is not the time to be going hard, team. Skill acquisition, learning skills usually has to be done in a controlled environment, slow and steady. We can't just blow up and do these things. We have to slowly develop skills. So on season, it's very rare that I would make them do anything overtly challenging. I might get the sweat up occasionally, but I'm really there to develop skills. Another way to think about this is if I have a deconditioned client, or I have movements in my programs that my clients haven't seen yet, I will use the off-season phase to teach them these new skills before I increase intensity. For a deconditioned client, that might mean that I'd spend 12 months teaching them the basics of nutrition and the basics of training. So that way they have the skill set and the understanding to then go after it later. They will still get results during this time. It might just not be as quick as the preseason and on season. However, we can't We can't throttle a car without an engine. We can't make something run really hard if it doesn't have the context. That's why we have off-season. Dear God, do not push them too hard in this space. This is all about skill acquisition. I might do this over 2 to 4 months for my yearly program. This might be the first 2 or 4 weeks of my 12-week program. If in my year I have 4 12-week programs or 4 8-week programs, the first 1/4 of my program might be sheerly built around getting people back in the flow and teaching them new skills. It's quite often off-season comes after recovery, so they might be a bit fatigued anyway. Pre-season is now dedicated, which is the next in our line. Pre-season is dedicated to getting their fitness to the level we need for when they're going to go into competition, or to get them to the fitness level they need to achieve their goal. We do not teach new skills in pre-season. This is not something we ever do. Why? Because all the time for skill development was in off-season. If they're not good at the thing by this time, you haven't spent enough time in the off-season. Pre-season is all about ramping training up so that the client is fit enough to be able to facilitate whatever it is they want to do. So if your client is an MMA fighter and they have to survive 5-5-minute rounds, they may have now developed the skills to be able to do that, but now we have to make sure they're fit enough that they can do that. If my client is a weight loss client and we've now given them the skill sets and understanding they need to lose the weight, and they've already lost some, I now want to ramp up the amount of output that they're getting. So for example, if my client wanted to lose 5 to 10 kilos over the period of a year, I might have given them all the nutrition understanding that takes time, given them all the training understanding that takes time. Now I'm going to start increasing the intensity of what they're doing to get them to the heart rate variabilities that I want to encourage weight loss quickly. And we'll talk about heart rate variability in a moment. Does that make sense? That's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to increase fitness levels so that by the time we get to on-season, we're already fit enough to be able to withstand the amount of damage that's going to be coming our way. We're also making sure that whatever the main movements of our 9 that the sport is related around, we have been doing in the 2 prior seasons. If we've got javelin throwers, you best believe that during their off-season and their pre-season, we're getting them to do a lot of javelin throws because they're not doing as much because they're not currently in season. So we don't want to lose that strength. When we move to the on-season, when the people like soccer players are now in their seasonal camp, they might be AFL players, the rugby players, Olympics, javelin throwers, whatever. This scales long-term and short-term. Our job now is to make sure they don't lose the fitness that they have. We want to keep them the fit enough that they can train. But more importantly, we're trying to make sure they don't get injured. Since they're now training all the time for their sport and usually at the higher level of the bell curve that is their training regime, they are very likely to get injured. And our goal as a coach is to make sure that doesn't happen. So when I'm programming this over the period of 12 weeks, 12 months, 12 years, whatever, I am making sure that their on-season is a space that we maintain the fitness levels they want and ensure that they don't lose progress or get hurt. If it's a weight loss client who's going for a wedding, it might be that now that they've hit the weight they want to look and they have the skills they want to have, it's about them not losing that skill set and maintaining the weight. Recovery is so crucial, team. It's probably the most important of the 4 in my opinion, but I have a bias towards recovery. The recovery is used to now fix any of the niggles or concerns that we saw during the on-season. So there's no way you walk away from your on-season feeling 100,000%. It's more likely that some niggles and restrictions have popped up, which is good. We need to identify these problems. That is what we use the recovery time for. Firstly, we need to give people a mental break. People will fall in and out of love of fitness all the time because they haven't had enough time for rest. Think about yourself. If you have 2 weeks off the gym and you're a daily gym goer or 2 weeks off your sport, you start craving to return, which is a really good feeling to abuse as a coach or PT because I want them to feel like they need to come back to me, which more often than not they do, but it's also just a good thing to play on the knowledge and knowing that they're going to want to come back to you. Really, really relevant. During the recovery, I'm offsetting and fixing any of the problems we ran into, giving the client time to rest and digest and relax, and trying to have some analysis and some suggestions of what we might do in the next year. But this is just to build recovery and build the desire to want to train again. If I was to run an 8 or 12 week camp team, you almost always will see a 1 or 2 week block of just recovery training where most of my clients will either be at home doing nothing, doing passive recovery, or will be doing stretching and rehab sessions with me. Why? Because I want to make sure that my clients are unbreakable. So the next round we can improve, and because it helps build the pressure of wanting to train again. High-level athletes will spend millions of dollars in the recovery section of this program because every year they can continue to train will net them more money. So if it's a $10 million contract for some athletes and $1 million is spent on recovery, that might buy them another year of training and performing, which will make them another $10 million. So really important that we don't breeze past the recovery sessions and breeze past the recovery section. Remember, you have options. You can do a 12-week, 8-week, whatever, session, programming, PT, whatever. That can sit in your overarching 12-month program plan. Inside that are four 12-week or 8-week programs. And then you can even go as far down as your actual 1 week program might have 1 or 2 sessions dedicated to each of these 4 phases of programming. So it works like a big pyramid. We have our overarching 12-month 4-phase plan, our preseason, on-season, off-season recovery. We have the same thing built into our 8 to 12-week program. So we might be ramping them up with skills and understanding, then start building their fitness up with a higher heart rate, a higher intensity. Then we might go really, really hard in the last couple of weeks, and then we tailor them off for recovery to prep them for the next set. Same true might be for their week. We might start their week off early and then ramp them up, but it's more important that you have a plan in place for when you're doing long-term training with clients. Again, if you don't have the visual, go to YouTube because it'll be on YouTube, or on Spotify, click it up to the visual so you can see that. If not, just trust me, just listen to me. Again, if you need to take notes and pause stuff, team, go for it. This is just some concepts I want you to have a think about in relating to your own programming. Again, applying it is the challenge, understanding it. If you can understand it, you're already the 99 percentile. A lot of these things, coaches will go their whole career through and never learn, and they wonder why they're not very successful. It's just because they didn't take the time to talk to a mentor who could show them these easy tricks to improve. One of the 1% things to understand that often blows coaches' minds and makes them go from a 0 to a hero coach very, very quickly is understanding the difference between what linear training is and what transverse training is. For the anatomy nerds, we're talking about the planes of movement. For everyone else, we're talking about if my shoulders and hips are in a line versus if they're rotating or moving away from each other. Linear being shoulders and hips are staying in a line, transverse being that they're turning away from each other. Okay. Why that's so relevant is because most, if not every single movement you're going to do and see and get prescribed and get clients to do will fall into one of these 2 categories. For the linear plane, I want you to think about everything gym related. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, bench press, squats, lunges, deadlifts, running, sprinting, all those things, the shoulders and the hips never leave alignment with each other. Why is that relevant? Well, linear movement is really, really good for beginners because it's very, very safe. We are far stronger in a line than we are rotationally. So that's good. So I use a lot of linear stuff for beginners. I use a lot of linear stuff when I want to create very hard outputs because I can make someone work really, really hard in the linear space because it's often safer. A lot of muscle growth happens in the linear space because if I can isolate a muscle and I want to bring it all the way to fatigue where it's in danger of ripping because I want it to grow, I want to make sure that's in the safest plane I can do. So isolation in the linear plane can often lead to some really good hypertrophy. But linear is the key there. It's hard to isolate movements in the transverse plane because rotation often requires more than one thing, where linear you can do with singular muscles. For example, think tricep extensions or calf raises or bicep curls, whatever. You've isolated something and you're moving it through its general range. You'll notice that a lot of joints sit in the linear plane. They move things up and down, not so much rotationally, without assistance. The transverse plane is exactly as I've kind of the opposite of linear. It's all about rotational strength. Think about sports, throwing a baseball, throwing a javelin, going for a swim, starting a lawnmower, throwing a ball, doing jiu-jitsu, running against someone in AFL, running against someone during rugby. All these things are in weird positions. So it's like weird position training. Okay. You might even think about like a yoga instructor or a gymnast doing odd positions. These are really good team because they build strength in odd positions and they build that kind of farmer strength idea is what people often talk about. Usually pretty good to help you with recovery and mobility. If I'm doing a lot of linear training, it's not uncommon to see people start develop injuries because they're not playing in the transverse plane as much. Same too is true that if someone's only doing planar movements, transverse movements rather, the linear plane is where they start developing injuries. To help clients understand this and to help visualize this a bit better yourself, I want you to imagine 3 people have come to help you move your house. Oh my God, it's a terrible house, but it's okay. Oh, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. There's 3 people to help you move your house. There's a bodybuilder, there is a gymnast, and there is a farmer. The bodybuilder comes in and he lifts up the fridge by himself. He's incredibly powerful. But as he goes to turn to put that fridge on the truck, his back pops because he's not used to rotating. The gymnast or yoga instructor, whichever one you prefer, is effortlessly throwing boxes into the truck. No problem. They're twisting, they're turning. It's basically a dance, right? But as soon as they go to help you lift the washing machine, they hurt their back because they're not strong in a line. The farmer is good at twisting stuff and he's good at lifting stuff. He is not as strong as the bodybuilder, nor is he as rotationally powerful as the gymnastics thrower or dancer or whatever. However, he can do the job quite well because he's got a little bit of both. He's not on either extreme, but he is certainly good at doing the task of moving the house. That's why we talk about being farmer strong is like functional longevity. So what I want you to talk to and think about with your clients is you must give them the options of stuff. Think about the 3, the farmer, the bodybuilder, and the gymnast, and think about it as a spectrum. When my client wants to become a bodybuilder, they're trading off the transverse and functional side of training because to grow muscle quickly and at size, you must spend a lot of time in the linear plane because it's safer to do work. If I want someone to be functionally strong and more injury resistant, I might spend more time in the transverse plane, but that might mean that we don't grow as muscle as quickly. Now there are exceptions to these rules, but we're speaking generally. If I want a little bit of both, I can certainly do that, but I might not develop as much muscle as the bodybuilder, and I might not be as functionally powerful as the gymnast, but I'll be a happy middle, which is, again, a lot of people's goals these days, to be both strong and practical, but you won't be as big nor as strong as others. Just giving your clients that context is really important. So it's like if a javelin thrower comes to me, and I love the javelin thrower example, good idea for you guys as coaches to think about having analogies in your back pocket that you can give to clients really quickly, where you might have 1 or 2 things, like I use the farmer, the bodybuilder, and the gymnast a lot. I use javelin throwing a lot because it's easy to understand and it saves you going deeper into the actual physics and science of stuff, which they certainly don't care about. For the javelin thrower, if I train them to be a really good javelin thrower, they're going to have one side of their arm good at throwing and the other arm not so much. Functionally, that's not very practical. Who would have thought? But if their goal is to get a gold medal, then I'm not sure how much they actually care about the function of their body rather than the ability of their body to perform in their sport. So they've made a trade-off for function for performance, and they've made a conscious effort with that. And us as our coach, we're just here to facilitate their goal. We're not here to repaint their car if they've just asked for fuel, despite us thinking it looks better. Please just deliver to them the thing that they asked. Just give them the context and consequences of the stuff they're deciding to do. If they want to lose weight really, really quickly, they might have to pause some of their muscle building for a little bit of time. Versus if they want to put muscle on very quickly, they might have to pause their weight loss. But if they want a little bit of both, they might be playing with body composition, but they must understand that it will be slower and it won't be as good or as quick as either side. These are good things to be mentioning to people, and context I really want you to give whilst you're doing your consults and talking to your clients. But transverse versus linear, When, I'm going to say it like this, when sporting recruiters are looking for children to join into their teams, from the guys who I've talked to and some books related around the topic, they are no longer looking for students who are just really good at one sport. So if you're a really cracking good hockey player and you're in the under 12s or under 15s, one of the first things the actual recruiters are looking for is if you're doing more than one sport as well as being dynamite at hockey. The reason being is because hockey might hit some transverse movements and some linear movements. However, if they're also doing a little bit of gymnastics and running or weightlifting, they start getting stronger in lots of different other spots that hockey might lack. And that's why we splinter in transverse and linear into the same programs, because we want to be strong in all sections and all movements of our body. Now, all of our movement patterns, our push, pull, plank, lunge, squat, hinge, crawl, ground to standing, and gait, each of them can be both transverse and linear. So a really good habit I suggest you get into is have 2 of each in your back pocket. So you should have 2 transverse movements for pull, plank, hinge, etc., 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 and 2 linear movements for each. So if you ever get stuck and you're trying to think of a way to make it so that this week your client gets a hinge movement and you haven't done much transverse training, you have something in your back pocket to be able to apply to them. You might even just write it down into a master template that you have on your computer. I always say, and it's been said many times, don't bother remembering stuff if you can just write it down. Over a long enough time horizon, you'll just remember it anyway. Now, again, good idea. Try to write down 2 of each of the things. Think of your 9 movement patterns and think of a transverse and think of a linear thing that might apply to that space. Pretty good idea. Now, there's so much to get into, Tim. Again, feel free to pause the video if you need, but there is a lot to kind of understand. If you know your 9 movements, if you know about your seasonal training, you know about your linear and your transverse training, you're already a goddamn dynamite coach. I'm going to add more stuff here now if you want to become really, really good. We're starting to move into territory that people just spend a lifetime trying to learn, and you can go into a lot of detail on, but if you know the generic stuff around it, it will make your programming just unbelievable, where you can start charging whatever you really want because the programming is so tight. Again, this is not how to do it. This is just telling you things I think about when I'm programming. I want to talk to you about heart rate variability, and to save us time, I'm going to call it HRV. You will have heard of the term HIIT training before. You may not know it means high intensity interval training. You may not, who knows. High intensity in this context that we're discussing now means that your heart rate is between 85 and 100% of its max output. Okay, that's high intensity. That's just the definition we're going to use. There are 3 other intensities we need to consider. High intensity is 85 to 100. Mid intensity is 75% to 85% of their max heart rate. Low intensity is 75% to 85% of their heart, is 65% to 75% of their heart rate. And resting heart rate is anything below 65%. Okay? High intensity interval training, HIIT training, it's telling me that the heart rate is going from resting or low all the way to high intensity. The word interval would indicate that it's coming back down. Training is training. So if I'm writing a program and I want HIIT training, if the heart rate isn't coming back down and returning to low, it is not true HIIT training. And a really good indicator for me, if people who send me their programs, if they're telling me that it's a HIIT session, but they've got the client to get their heart rate as high as they can and keep it there for as long as they can, there is no interval and therefore it's not HIIT training. And it might indicate to me that their programming and knowledge base in this industry is not up to snuff. If I get their heart rate all the way high and try to keep it for as long as they can, that's called HISS training, high intensity, because it's still high intensity. Steady state, meaning ongoing. Steady, because it's not moving. State, because it's in the state of going. I call this tiger training. You only get one shot to run away from a tiger. You go as hard as you can, and you either get away or you die. Now, note that in this higher intensity space, this 85 and above, this is very oxygen deprived. It's hard to get here and stay here because you're not necessarily going to be able to turn oxygen over quick enough to be able to allow the heart rate to pump at that levels. So it's not often that we spend a lot of time here. It's suggested that you get about 4 hours of true 100, sorry, not 4 hours, but 4 minutes a week of actual true 85 to 100% output, a true 100%, but that might not be accurate for everyone. Some athletes can do up to 20 minutes a week, but in your 5-day or whatever training regime, you might only get the client to be able to spend very minimal amount of times up here. And you're sure as shit not getting brand new starting clients to play with high intensity interval training or high intensity steady state training. That's a bad idea. Because the nature of high intensity means that it's hard to control it, it's more about going as hard as you can than it is controlling whatever it is you're doing. As a result of that, it's often common that you can result in injury if the client hasn't been shown the movements during our off season. We haven't taught them how to do it, and they don't have the context around it. So please do make sure that you reserve this for occasionally, or make sure that the client is conditioned enough to be able to do this. If I'm walking a client who's obese on a treadmill to warm them up and their heart rate is trending up to this higher intensity space, it's a good indicator that they're not ready to be pushed overly hard. A good thing to look out for, team, when I'm thinking about someone's health, if I think that they're actually got strong fitness and health, I care not so much about how quickly their heart rate can rise. I care a lot more about how quickly their heart rate can drop. The indicator for me is if you're healthy or not, is if can you get your heart rate back down? Because anyone can get it up. It'll just end up in a heart attack. It's the skill of being able to force your heart into a higher level of outputs, then return it. The good news is MIT training, mid-intensity interval training, and MISS training, mid-intensity steady state, are pretty self-explanatory. They follow the same rules as HIIT and HISS. The only difference is our heart rates only go to the middle space or go to the middle space and maintain for a long period of time. Here's what's interesting about MIT. MIT, I want you to think about a 2 to 3 kilometer run where you're running, or you think of an athlete who could do that. They are running relatively hard. It's challenging. And if not practiced, they won't be able to maintain it for long. But if we can train in this space, we might be able to hold it for 20 minutes or so. It's hard, or 20 to 30, 40 minutes, whatever. We are trying to make it so that the client can turn over oxygen and keep a high out rate. So if they're not focused in this space, they're probably not going to be able to maintain it for very long. But if they've been training to stay focused and keep their breath work under control, they can do this for a lot longer period of time. Think MIT training. When you're doing mid-intensity interval training, I want you to think about large muscle groups like squats and stuff. When I'm doing squats, so many muscles are moving to help me perform that it moves more blood in your body, which ramps up your heart rate. So when I'm doing squats, I might find that 12 to 15 reps gets me to a MIT and borderline a HIIT space because there's so much blood being moved around. Really good. We're trying to increase this area of heart rate variability. Not a bad idea. Big muscles move lots of blood. Who would have thought? So when I'm training clients because I want to improve their MIT and MISS space, I might think big movements or big muscle groups, but within controlled environments. I might be getting them to do it for time, or might be trying to get them to do it for form or slow or whatever. I'm not necessarily flogging them like I would a HIIT or HISS. HIIT and HISS might even be like a 1RM. Really important, team. We're trying to create strength in all of these areas. When I'm going to LIT and LISS, which is low intensity interval training and low intensity steady state, think of like a casual jog. Jog being, we can maintain chat, we can move. It's difficult, but it's not too difficult, okay? When you think about like sitting on a bike in front of a TV, you can sit there for 2 hours and pedal away. It's just casual, it's slow turnover. When we're trying to find these heart rates, team, we have tech to help us. Our Google Watches and our heart rate variability bands that you can wear around your chest will tell you where your client is. But if you're old school or if you don't have access to technology, ask them out of 10 how hard the thing was. 8 to 10 is hit, 6 to 8 is mit, and anything below is lit and liss. Remember that if they can't speak at all, they're gasping for air, that's a good indicator they're in hit and hiss. If they can talk to you, it's just challenging, might be mit and miss, and if they can hold a conversation, it'll be lit and liss. So again, for low intensity steady state, think about a long run that's ongoing. There's no drop in their heart rate. And lit might be up and down like this. They never crack into that higher mit space and they come back down to recovery each time. Think about like a bicep curl here, team. Although, yes, the muscle is going to fatigue to a point where it can't function, the muscle's not big enough to generate enough heart rate or enough blood flow to put you up into these higher ranges. Just the muscle's just straight not big enough. Or think about like a recovery movement. It might be so specific that it's not generating enough blood flow to ramp you up. I always, team, try to get my clients to be able to play in each of these heart rates when appropriate. I don't rush clients into the higher levels if I don't think they're ready to get there, okay? Why they're beneficial and why I like them to be strong in all planes is because in sports, let's use boxing for example, there'll be moments that you're low intensity trying to just work your client, work your opponent. There's times where you're putting the gas on them and there's times you're trying to finish the fight. So we need to be strong in all areas of our heart rate so that way we have an unbreakable, very functional client. Same too true is in the lit and list space, I can do it for a long period of time, but since the output isn't very high, it might take 2 hours to burn 300 calories. In the mit and miss space, since it's moderately challenging, it might only take me 30 minutes to burn 300 calories because the outputs are higher. If I'm in the hit and hiss space, it might take me only 5 minutes to burn 300 calories because it is such a challenging space to be in. Same result, different time frame. The only thing to consider is not everyone can do these kind of trainings, and I'll base off their readiness if I feel like I can really push them today or if it's not appropriate. Our final section of this is just recovery, and that's our space that's below 65% heart rate in this context. That might change depending on who you talk to. When you're talking to me, this is what I would use as far as my heart rate variability. I try to program one of each of these in a week or days that have combinations of a few. I might have a hit, mit, and lit day. I might have a hiss, mit, and list day all on the same thing. So I'll have one day all dedicated to steady state, one day all dedicated to interval training, a combination of the two. I might just have lower intensity days when I'm working on structures and forms and programming and movements. In my off season, I might be working only in the mit and lit space, the low intensity and mid intensity space. When I'm ramping up to preseason, I might only be in the mit and hit space for a while. Recovery might only be in the lower intensity space. These are things I need you to consider. Again, I'm not teaching you how to use them. I'm just teaching you things that I'm considering when I'm writing a program. I'm really going to emphasize that point, team, because I will soon show you how to use these in your program. Right now, I just need you to understand these are things that I look into. Next, team, we talk about recovery. We must be so careful here. Recovery is really, really challenging because you must stay within your scope of practice. As we get more knowledgeable and as you become one of these 1% of 1% trainers like I'm trying to get you to be, it's very tempting to try to help people in things that you're not necessarily able to help them in. And that's okay. That's just the nature of you wanting to help people. You wouldn't have become a coach if you didn't want to do that. But you're really important for you to stay in your scope of practice. So when I'm thinking about recovery styles, there are two types. There is active recovery and passive recovery. Passive recovery is something that I let the clients do usually without me. It's something that's simple enough that doesn't need my constant vigilance around it. Passive means I'm not doing anything, something else is. So think about perhaps a massage, a muscle gun, a sauna, an ice bath, a hot tub, movie with a friend, things that bring them joy and relax them. That's passive. I give people those things to do in programming outside of time in gym space because they're far more likely to do something they don't have to do any work towards, which is a good rule of thumb. It's not likely that the client will do stuff in general without you there, but to give you your best shot to help them, give them passive recovery outside of your training hours. Active recovery is when I'm trying to strengthen muscles that are loose or loosen muscles that are tight. And we must stay in scope of practice here, team. So I'm going to give you very broad things that you shall not do and shall not touch and refer out. And then we'll deep dive into my system that I use when I'm recovering a client. Do not touch a client ever. So you're not meant to touch them. That's not something you have scope of practice to do. You get to choose either to increase your scope of practice, or you can use tools like foam rollers, muscle guns, voodoo floss bands, pressure point balls, whatever, that they can self-manipulate on. So that's rule 1, don't touch them. No touchies, bad. Touch, no. If a client's range of motion in a joint is 30% less than it should be, so if I get someone on the arm and they can't go much further than this, or if that's the full range of motion I would expect, and they can't even get to like 90 degrees without pain, send them away. It is not worth the headache of you trying to fix this problem. So as far as range of motion there is concerned, don't bother. We have health professionals around these spaces for a reason. Just subscribe out, prescribe them, send them away, refer them out. It's not worth the headache. So too true is that if they have pain in a space in their joints or in their muscles, outside of training. So for example, they have shoulder pain that keeps them awake at night. You, without the right qualifications, should never ever touch that client. That is chronic pain. That is not pain that you are able to deduce. Leave it for the pros who can provide the correct scans. We are trying to stay in the scope of practice. You are a generalist. You are a handyman. You are not a plumber. You are a PT or a coach, not a physio or an exercise physiologist. So do keep those in mind. Don't touch clients. If they have 30% less a movement than you'd expect, refer them out, and do not work with chronic pain. It is not your scope of practice. Those are good rules of thumb. They're ones that have served me well. You may not agree. Your mentor may have other ideas on what your scope of practice is. Whatever, those are my 3 rules. Let's look at my system when I'm dissecting how to do recovery. When I'm doing recovery, I look at a couple things. The first thing I do is I choose one of the 9 movement patterns, or I look at the movement patterns that we've discussed previously in this kind of video. And I ask myself, is my client lacking strength in these positions? Or is there something within this position, in these movements, like, for example, structure or flexibility or anything like that that's restricting my client's ability to do stuff? Okay, which of the 9 is it? So let's say we're doing a big leg day, or our client's been having issues with squats. I go, which of the movements is that? It's squats. Who would have thought? So the restriction is their squat is not working. There's pain or discomfort related around it, whatever. Quick caveat, never use the word pain unless the client brings it up first, because you start making them think about the word pain. Use the word discomfort. If I say, when you do that deadlift, did you feel any discomfort? You will look for discomfort. If I say, did you feel any pain during your deadlift? You might now start associating deadlift with the word pain. Not a good idea as a coach. Let the client's language choice lead the conversation. But I digress. Squats is the movement of the day, or the thing they're having restrictions for. My next step is I ask myself, what joints are related to the squat? And we know in this instant, the 2 main ones is the hip and the knee. The ankle is a factor as well. But in this case, we're just going to look at the knee. I want to think about, in step 3, the muscles that are above that joint and below that joint. So I don't need you to be an anatomist here, but I want you to consider, for my knee joint, the legs, the muscles around the thigh, the hamstring, the quads, those kind of things. The legs around the shin and the calf, the muscles around the shin and the calf are also the things to consider. Okay, so those are the things above and below it. And my final step to help me stay in scope of practice and to blow the minds of my clients, ready? I loosen the tight stuff and tighten the loose stuff. So I'm going to ask the client what feels sore or tight in this space. If it's for the squat, I say, do you have any muscles above or below your knee that feel tight? The client will usually go, oh, geez, my quads are tight, or my hamstring's always been tight. Good idea to suggest to them to try to foam roll, massage gun, voodoo floss, or pressure point ball that space. Then you ask them, does it still hurt to the same capacity, or is there still restriction in the same capacity? More often than not, that is enough. Most of the time, these restrictions have developed because you included, no one fucking stretches and foam rolls ever. So that's why I incorporate it in most of my warm-ups and in my recovery days. Because more often than not, these niggles have developed just because we haven't done the thing we know we're meant to do. So when I break them through this step, when I start loosening tight stuff, so I might spend 5 minutes releasing the quad with foam rolling. Maybe I might release the IT band. I might do the calf. I might do the hamstring. All of a sudden, the client's movement range has increased dramatically. Okay? Who would have thought? Loose and tight stuff. If I really want to get into the nuts and bolts and I have the time to do it, I'm then going to ask the client, what's something that is loose? And you can probably see it. A good rule of thumb is if the client can't flex the muscle or has trouble mind to muscle connection with a certain muscle, it probably is a good indicator that it's not very strong. For example, the client might be able to flex their quads really, really easy, but has trouble isolating their hamstring. Might be worth seeing if they want to do any hamstring strengthening movements. Again, we're not telling them what to do. We're giving suggestions. We're saying, it's not a bad idea to loosen tight shit and tighten loose stuff, Stephen. Not a bad idea. Like, we're not prescribing movement, which is we're not allowed to prescribe stuff. We're just using common sense to guide the client to find their own discoveries. So no harm in allowing them to do their own foam rolling because it's a thing they've chosen to do. And it's not a bad idea if they've said to you that they have historically weak hamstrings inside this squatting range, provided that they've been cleared by physio for you to do so, you might encourage them to do more hamstring strengthening workouts inside their program. Then I ask them to do it for anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks because stuff, if it works directly in the minute, that's fantastic. That becomes a really easy sell for your client. If I immediately remove discomfort with foam rolling or voodoo flossing, and the client can see there and then an improvement in flexibility or strength or movement, that's the easiest sell of ever. But more often than not, you're going to ask them to do this whenever they feel they can for the next 2 to 4 weeks. And then you see if there's an improvement. Ideally, you start just putting into the beginning of all their workouts. That's a really good cheat code because then you'll see, because as we've discussed, you're documenting stuff, you're seeing if they're improving or not. Excuse me. So let's recap that. We identify what movements giving them issues or movements that we're working on that we need to make sure they're strong around. We're going to ask ourselves which joints are related, and we're going to choose one main one. We're then going to ask ourselves what are the muscles above and below that joint. And then we're going to loosen the tight shit and tighten the loose shit. I want you to think about, there's only really a couple joints that are worth remembering. Ankles, knees, hips, spines or spine, elbows, and shoulders. Everything beyond that, probably going to fall out of your scope of practice, but I don't have much issue working with ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, spines, elbows. Those are pretty good. We can do that because the muscles are really clear that which ones are above and below it. When we start getting into digits and we start getting into necks, not at all something that I would be bothering to play with, refer out. But spine's usually tight on one of the two sides, front or back, or left or right. We might have elbows, might have above and below it, could be forearms. Hips are usually the glutes, the hamstrings, quads. Again, these are very general things, but just thinking about muscles above. Again, we're not health professionals, we're not physios, we're not exercise physios, but we're giving general context around how we recover and look after clients. This is what we're doing in active recovery. So we can stretch out muscles, we can do yoga and we can do yoga, we can do transverse movements around these joints and muscles to help create a little bit of movement, whatever. But active recovery is all about using this system of identifying stuff, figuring out what joint it is, if is it tight or it's loose, and tightening or loosening it. We can use linear, we can use transverse to tighten it or loosen it, that's fine, but all of this requires the client to actually do stuff and move. That's why it's called active. So you have passive, where the client doesn't do anything, they just relax. They let someone else do the work for them. And then they have active, where they're letting the active is when they themselves, or you with them as a coach, do stuff to help them. So that's recovery. A quick one I want you to have, team, is you might have heard me say a couple of times, you must have some form of ongoing testing in your programming, because how the hell do you know if it's working if you're not actively documenting the process? So let's keep it simple, because you can document as much as you want. You can do as much documentation as you possibly can, and it will only make you better, not worse. But for most of the people I work with, I always suggest no less than 5. I have 2 that start and are quick. They are my quick tests, stuff that I can do on the day that take me very little amount of time to improve and take me very little amount of time to document. This could be hand calipers, this could be weight, this could be skin fold testing, this could be doing measurements around muscles or wastes that they want to increase or decrease. This could be beep tests, this could be sit and reach tests, whatever. Something that I can see right now, okay? So that's 2. Something I can document at the start of their program. My next 2 are middle related. So stuff that might take a little bit longer for me to demonstrate that there's been clear improvement. So that might be stuff more like 1RM testing and weight tracking. It could be stuff like pain reduction. It can be stuff like flexibility improvement, but I'm measuring something. If my client's using dumbbells over the period of my 12-week program, we might see, since they've been writing down their weights, them improving in that space, which is their middles. My final one, my one that's solo by itself, is the large goal, the large thing. It might be my 12-month plan instead of my weekly plans. This could be their overall goal, their weight, their body fat percentage, their muscle mass percentage, their want to hop on a stage, their before and after photo, what they might want to fit into a thinner or smaller shirt, whatever. I must have 5 things, 2 that are quick and short that I can do all the time so we can see improvement. 2 that are middler, so it takes a little bit longer to see results, but keeps my client engaged, and 1 that is long-term and overarching. Here's some rules I want you to apply. Again, we're trying to limiter principles, making these things more practical. They must, whatever goal or whatever test you choose, must be related to what the client's actually trying to do. I'm not going to do a beep test on a bodybuilder. They don't care about their fitness in that regard. They care about size. I'm not going to get a flexibility client to do 1RM testing. Does that make sense? We're not doing these things. We must build the 5 tests around the client's goals. Don't waste their time. Don't make yourself look foolish by giving them tests they don't give a shit about. Terrible idea. Really, really try to make sure that you've listened to the client and you're providing the goals and testing around it that's relevant. You could use their readiness as a goal tester. You could use their weight. You can use whatever. Okay, but do just make sure that it is built in and around what their goal is. You must have 5. You must be able to demonstrate to the client that firstly, what you've said you can do, you're doing. You must have these things in place so the client stays motivated. You must be able, we use these results in our marketing when the clients allow us. If my client's lost 20 kilos, since I've tracked the process, I can then use that as marketing for the next round of clients. So it's really important to keep these metrics, because when someone comes along with similar goals, you have unarguable evidence that you can provide the service in that regard that they want. Massively important. We're using it as marketing, and we're using it in our own metrics to prove that we are able to do what we say we can do. Finally, team, I want to talk about readiness. Something you've heard me mention already, but readiness is one of the things I ask every single client at the beginning of every single program, every single one-on-one session, or every single group session, because I need some clarity on how they're feeling before we start. I base their workout around what their readiness is. So let's quickly dive into it, and then we'll look at how I adapt the program a little bit to be able to help the client. There are 5 questions I want you to write on whatever whiteboard or print out and put on a wall, wherever you have clients see you most before one-on-ones and before group classes. And on that, you're going to have the words sleep. You're going to have the words hydration. You're going to have the word nutrition. You're going to have the word movement. And you're going to have the word stress. And you're going to have them all ranked out of 3. So a mark out of 3 for each of them. 3 is the best ever, really, really good, and 0 is complete dog water, really, really bad. I want you to ask your client to rank each of them. So we're going to go through, we're going to say, for sleep, how well did you sleep last night out of 3? 3 is the best you've ever had, and 0 is complete shit. They will say something like, oh, it was 2. I feel rested, but I don't feel super rested. Or I woke up before my alarm, so I'm feeling amazing. Or I'm pretty tired, Coach Chicken Legs. I had to get up and have like 3 cups of coffee, whatever. They're going to write down the number. Let's just say it's 2. Hydration is how clear their pee is. We don't deep dive too much into hydration because you're not nutritionists yet and you don't have those quals. So we just want to understand how much water's in their body because that tells us how liquid and how much fluidity the muscle will have, which will tell us how close or far away they are from muscle injury. But if they've got clear pee, they're in the clear. Clear pee is good. The reason I say how clear is your urine, not how much water you've drunk, is because if it's early morning, they might have drunk nothing, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're dehydrated. Their urine will be a good tell. Plus, they can usually tell how they feel. Feeling is, although a hard measurement to track, it is something that they will use to get these numbers. Nutrition is a very complicated question at our level, at the level you guys are concerned at. I just want you to ask them, how has their nutrition been at the minute, good or bad? Most clients will associate bad with like pizza and beer. So if they've had a big bender of a night, they might say 0, which is terrible. If they think that they've been doing really well, that they might say 3. In your endeavors to be a better coach, you will improve your skill sets around this area. So you might start being able to ask some questions like, have you had all 5 colors of vegetables? Have you had high protein diet? Have you balanced your fats? Have you had your carbohydrates? Have you had your starches? Have you had your fibers? Have you had your sugars? These things, as you become better at nutrition, are something that you can start asking your higher level clients, which will prove to them that you understand a little bit more, and it means you probably have a higher end client. If you need more clarity on some of the questions and how to do nutrition, follow along with my nutritional series that I have on my YouTube channel. It just saves you a lot of time. That's exactly what I do with clients. It's not teaching you how to do it. It's just giving you some context of how I would do it myself. And that's all within your scope of practice if you wanted to do it without any quals. Movement is the 4th next thing on the list, which is how many niggles do they have? How restricted do they feel? And how sore are they? So if they've just had a big leg day 2 days prior to your training session today, they might feel really restricted. So they might only give you a 1 out of 3 because they feel restricted. Very relevant because if I have a group class and I see on the board that everyone is restricted in movement because I've given them a particularly hard session recently, I might make the sessions warm up a bit longer to help elongate and stretch them out, or I might make the warm up sequence of raising their heart rate and muscle warmth longer so that prepare them for movements that are different to the thing that's causing them pain and discomfort. Stress is a bit tricky because it's a very open-ended question and we don't necessarily want to deep dive with the client unless they feel they need to. We're not therapists. I say, how stressed are you? 0 is no stress at all. Sorry, 3 is no stress at all, where I'm stress-free, it's really good, and 0 is really stressed out of my mind. If they're really, really high stress, so they give you 0 out of 3 and they're having trouble functioning, I might simply make the end of their warm-up a game, something that relieves stress, something fun, or I might give them some active or passive recovery to help boost up this relaxation idea before I ramp them. I don't really want to ramp a client up more during training if they're already really, really heightened. Not necessarily worth your time. And we will ourselves dive into parasympathetic and sympathetic, which is rest and digest and fight or flight that comes relative for stress. But at your level, all I want you to think about is stress client, bad client. That's not good. So we have sleep, hydration, nutrition, movement, and stress. And your client will give you out of 15 a number. You don't have to do it out of 3, team. You can do it out of 5, you can do it out of 10. I don't care. I just like 3 because it's different. The client looks at it and goes, oh, that's different. I was expecting 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10. It doesn't matter. I'm always trying to think of how better to increase the client experience. And 1 out of 3 just makes it a little bit more unique than the generic. Okay. Your client might say they are 10 out of 15 today based off adding all those numbers together. I will then ask them with a magic wand, if I could fix any of them to make it 100%, which one would it be? They might say that if I could fix any, I would really like to see my stress reduced. So they write 10S as well as their name. So they might write like Eddie 10S. So on the board, I have now a bunch of names and a bunch of metrics. So a lot of readiness metrics. I can see exactly where people sit. I can see what's the main thing irking the clients today. And I also see people's names. So if I've forgotten someone's name because I haven't trained with them much, or because I have such a huge client base, it's hard to remember people, I now have a visual cue to remember who that person is. Good rule of thumb, team, is that if it's their clients are between 12 and 15 in readiness, that's a good day for hit and hiss training, higher intensity. If they are, let's say 8 to 12, it might be MIT and miss training, so middle intensity. If the clients are running more between 4 and 8, I might do something like lit and list training, lower intensity stuff. If the clients are 0 to 4, I'm doing a full recovery day because I've got to boost them out of that spot. That's really bad. We don't want them that low. Why I like this, and I usually spend a couple of minutes explaining to new clients during the induction phase, this system. So once they know it, they can just walk to the whiteboard and over time, within a couple of seconds, they can just knock up what their readiness is. And that way I can just have this beautiful exchange where I know roughly where they are really quickly without having to have the dialogue. If you're tracking their metrics, I'm always hoping that the client is trending up and plateauing at the higher numbers. You may find that the client is plateauing, meaning doing continuously at middle range numbers, which is like 7 to 10, or unfortunately, you might find that clients are trending down sometimes. These are red flags for us as coaches. If our client is trending down over a long enough time horizon, so a period of days or weeks, we see they go from a 12 to a 10 to an 8 to a 4 to a 4 to a 3 to a 2 to a 2 to a 1. This means they are running down towards injury. There is no way they can keep training at that level, at any level, with trending down readiness. You will eventually get injured and then you're up shit creek. So this is a red flag for me that something must change for the client to boost them out of this readiness space. They're allowed to have an off day here or there, but they're not allowed to run themselves to injury. That's not going to happen. Super, super important to track these things, team. A lot of my clients love the readiness system because they know that if they come in and they're low, they're a 0 to a 4, I always promise and guarantee to my clients that they will leave the building better than they walked in. If you're not trying to make the client's experience better than they walked in, you're doing something wrong traditionally in your programming and coaching. So if my client walks in and they're really, really fatigued, they know I'm not going to try to flog them with a disgustingly hard program. There are coaches out there, and you may be one of them, and I'm really hoping since you're watching these videos, you're not, who just think hard and heavy means better. So they're like drill sergeants, forever giving these really disgusting, difficult programs seen in some sporting communities that train through it, train harder, get after it. But if our readiness is trending down, it will eventually just get injured and you'll lose clients. Because if I walk into your room and I'm a 4 out of 15 and you ask me to do sprint training drills or clean and presses or kettlebell throws, you're going to lose me as a client because I just don't have the capacity to do that today. But my clients are very aware that I only ask for you to come into the room and let me worry about the rest. I might put the 0 to 4 client in a giant set of Normatec sleeves, which are compression sleeves around your legs and your arms, and make them lie down on the couch for an hour. So when they leave the room, they're 6 out of 10 because their pain has been reduced. They might have a little bit of a nap and they're a little bit more mobile. That's great. I've improved the service for them. And that's all we're trying to do, improve their health along the way. Does that make sense? So if the clients come in and they're a 12 to a 15 and they're ready to go, yeah, I'm going to flog them. I'm going to give them that opportunity to burn that energy, to have a crack at it. But if they're, for example, not in that space, that's also okay. I will just adapt the program as necessary. In a big group training session, if I have half the room really energetic and ready to go and half the room not energetic and lethargic and perhaps injured or in that lower heart rate range, I might say to the room when we get to certain exercises, all right, guys, if you're above a 10 today, I want you to absolutely get after it. Give me everything you got, leave nothing on the table, get that at that tank to 0. For everyone else who's below a 6, I know some of you aren't feeling flash after the big weekend, I want you to focus on the form, take your time and really try to keep your breath under control. This particular movement for you is about control. So now I've split the room, and now two groups of people, although they're doing the same thing, they are in the sense that they're doing the same exercise, they're doing it with different purposes. Okay, that's just easy alterations to programming that you can do. Okay, I'm going to give you now the caveat of all this stuff. This stuff is absolutely fantastic, really, really valuable. And I really want you guys to understand these are just some of the basic theories around programming, how to understand movement patterns, how to program for 12 months, 12 weeks and one session. So what's my yearly plan look like? Are they moving transversely or linear or in a line, linear? Are they in a heart rate? What am I trying to get as far as an outcome in their heart rate? What's their readiness like? Are they even able to perform these things? How am I aiming to recover muscles that keep giving me niggles? How do I do that? These things are the things we're looking at. And again, I'm not teaching you how to do that specifically. I'm giving you the ideas and concepts that I use in my own programming. Soon enough, coming out for you will be deep dives into these concepts in coming months, because I want you to be able to not only understand what we're talking about, but implement them yourself. Not a bad idea to, in your programming for the next couple of weeks, choose one and only one of these concepts and see if you can apply it to your own training. Do not give a client something that you yourself have not tested. Terrible idea, because you just don't know how they're going to feel. You're not sure what the outcome's going to be. You might have intentions of writing a MIT and miss session for a client, and when you do it, you find that it doesn't generate enough movement of the muscle to elevate the heart rate high enough. Or you might be trying to get a client to do a lit and list session, so a lower intensity session, but find that the movement of choice is too high impact and is pushing them into the hit and hiss space. Without testing, there's no way you can tell. So over time, as you test stuff, you will start making these master templates, these massive templates where you will have a yearly 12-month program for weight loss, hypertrophy, body composition, and functional training. And then you'll have 12-week programs related around those topics. So then when you get clients in each of those spaces, you can just start sliding them over the top of your master programs. But until you have made thousands of programs around each of the individual concepts, you don't have the skill sets to write massive blocks, because you just don't have the ability to test, to prove that the systems work with your reliable testing. So nothing beats reps and nothing beats time. It's this, like the story I often tell, that when I was learning how to program, my mentor asked me to write 100 programs of each of them different types of things, body composition, functional training, but mainly 100 programs around his group class. And when I'd finished writing it, after 3 months of a hell of a lot of writing, I slapped it on his desk, and I later just found it in the bin. When I approached him to say, what the hell, he basically said, it wasn't about the writing the program, it was about the reps, because I'm willing to bet that your first program in that slab wasn't as good as your last. And he was right. I was hoping that the volume of programs would be impressive to him, and he far valued the quality, but you can't get the quality without doing the reps. So do keep that in mind, team. It's not a bad idea to have a couple of different movement patterns up your sleeve. For example, you should have, of the 9 movement patterns, 2 linear movements that come to mind for each of them, and 2 transverse movements that come to mind for each of them. For your recovery, for your ability to mobilize and recover a client while staying in scope of practice, you should be able to identify what movement pattern it's from. You should then be able to know which joint, the main joint of that movement is. We should then have a look at which muscles are above and below it. Again, you don't have to be an anatomist, but you do need to know what muscles are. And then think about loosening tight stuff and tightening loose stuff. Hopefully this was helpful, team. Reach out for any questions you have, and keep an eye on all of our social medias for the upcoming deep dives on all of these concepts. Very big news coming soon, team. So stay linked in. It's going to be really exciting, and hopefully we're going to blow your mind. All right. Bye.